69. 69, Barry, one of our favorite numbers, I think you can say, but there's a 1 in front of this one. So it's episode 169, Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren and Barry. I'm going to throw it to Ambler, PA, in the basement of God knows where. It's Lord Barons himself. What's happening, my man?
Stuck in the basement, Jeff, but I got to tell you, we've over the last couple of weeks, we've had a lot of snow, or I should say a good amount of snow. It's been really cold. Today, I think it's like 40 degrees. The sun is out, so I'm feeling a little more positive. But Jeff, the big question everybody wants to know, your Christmas a couple of days ago. We're recording this, I guess, 3 days past Christmas. How was your Christmas? More importantly, how was Mrs. Bowdren's Christmas?
Mrs. Bowdren went above and beyond the call as she was a baking machine. My blood sugar level has jumped probably 3 points. She made an assortment of cookies and different things. I posted some pictures of the cake my daughter had on Christmas Eve, the Oreo cake, Barry. Was that fairly impressive?
Very impressive.
Thank you. And then last night, my wife is making for her coworkers, she's making about 4 pans of fudge. She actually says this to me, Barry, I'm going to wait on making fudge for you till some of the sweets in the house are gone. I said, that's very, very, very nice of you to do that. So today, on today's episode, going to be a heavy wrestling content. So some of you out there will be extremely happy in that. We're going to be taking a look at a match from April 20th, 1991. A match that, after doing some solid research, as I want to do here on Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren and Barry, your favorite podcast, I'm sure, this match, Barry, came in at number 9 in 1991. There were 8 matches that were said to be better than this match in that particular year. And I'm going to start off the show, and I'm going to do a mic drop. Are you ready, Barry?
Let's do it.
This might be one of the 5 best matches I've ever seen in my life. Boom! That's the way you start off a show. So we're going to Japan. It is a 6-man tag. Our good friend Eric Cholminsky told me when I reached out to him, he said, this is one of my bucket list matches that I wish I was at live. So Mr. Cholminsky, our resident Japan expert, knows all too well about this match. I'm going to be getting that in just a second. Besides that, Barry, I know you are very excited because we have a person who was a member of the guest panel at the very first CWF Legends Fan Fest in beautiful downtown Lutz, don't call me Lutz, Florida. We are going to the Lady Maxine, and we're going to have a lot of fun with that interview. Very intelligent lady, she's way smarter than I am, I can tell you that, Barry. And besides that, let's see, we're going to be, of course, a little bit of sad news in the wrestling world this week. Not one, but two deaths. Danny Hodge, very sad, Barry, but, I will say at his age, lived a full life, got his money's worth out of life. On the other hand, we also lost John Huber, Brody Lee, who unfortunately at age, I believe, 41, did not get his money's worth out of life. We're going to be discussing that, plus some other things. Barry, what do you think? You ready to go?
It's a big show, isn't it? You could just
it's always a big show.
There you
on
go.
The very finest, I'm going to say it, Barry, the very finest show on the entirety of the Arcadian Vanguard. I mean the entirety. That's right. In the words of Buddy Landale, I said it. So now, before we start with our match that we're going to talk about, Barry, recently I was going through the old closet at the Casa de Bowdren, and I happened to come across some of my old After magazines, and lo and behold, I came across an article in the After magazines, and I sent a picture of it to you. The reference person, when this was kind of interesting, was High Gardner, father of the Buddha Dean himself, Jeff Gardner, and it referenced the situation that happened at Miami Beach Convention Center. I told you about it. You said, hey, I was there. And that was the night that the great one, Jackie Gleason, got a little candid with the NWA World Champion Harley Race. Barry, you were there. Tell us about this incident.
I was there, Jeff. That was during an era that I consider my favorite era of CWF. And it was actually, I should say too, I think it was right in the era. It was during the Harley Race booking. And I loved Harley.
So I have to
Race.
apologize. He was not the world champion then.
He was not. He was the booker. So Jack Briscoe was the world champion. It would have been at some point I forget exactly when in 75. I think May, June, somewhere right around there, maybe late spring, early summer. Not the world's heavyweight champion, but Harley was brought in. I should say we went from Bill Watts, who I think is one of the, not just, certainly in Florida, Bill Watts is one of the great bookers, but I think overall, Bill Watts is maybe one of the great bookers of all time. Yes, he had a terrible run in WCW in the early 90s, but if you go back to his work in the 70s and the 80s, Bill Watts was the man. Literally, I'm going to say top 3 of all time. He was that good. So Bill Watts was finishing
Eddie's
up.
finest student, would you agree?
Yeah, I would say. You know why? I'll tell you what. Yes, and I will agree. And I'll tell you what makes him is that Bill Watts was smart enough to be able to listen, absorb, and learn. And I don't think a lot of people can do that. And I honestly think Bill Watts was a guy that realized that, okay, if I'm going to be a big success, because Bill, to go back with this, Bill had come down to Florida after the separation with Leroy McGurk. They were partners in the tri-state wrestling, which, Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, Oklahoma. And as it turns out, they had a massive falling out, and Bill Watts came down to Florida and handled the book for Eddie. Bill was wrapping up an epic run as booker where literally, you had the Dusty turn during this. So the highest gates the state ever saw was probably during the Bill Watts booking philosophy. And then he was wrapping up and Bobby Shane was taking over as booker. Bobby had the book for maybe 2 weeks. We know the story, the plane crash, Bobby dies, and it really just throws Florida into a loop at this point. What are they going to do and how are they going to get through this and how are they going to get out of it? And they called up Harley Race. And I got to tell you, Harley did a great job as booker. And for me, it was, we got to see new faces, some really new ideas. And I really enjoyed 1975, my favorite year. So with that, and I'm sure that this was all, this was Harley, but so Jackie Gleason, Miami Beach resident, was a guy that had done the Jackie Gleason show at the Miami Beach Auditorium, which was renamed the Jackie Gleason Auditorium. And he showed up on a Wednesday night at the auditorium. And, I'm not privy to the details in the back. And I never asked Harley Race about that. I only had one conversation with Harley. It was 5 minutes. That should have been the first question I asked instead of, I'm sure I asked some drivel that made no sense to Harley, but I should have asked. But he shows up and they get in the ring and Jackie came out. And I was 11 years old, I believe. So I'm going off the memory of an 11-year-old, but it was a big deal.
It's probably a better memory than a guy that wears a mask made out of crimson.
Like a red, yeah, right.
So anyway,
I can remember details really deep at 4 years old, but we were just discussing this. What are the odds, right?
But about those Joe Scarpa matches when you were
Yeah. But what made this really unique was the level of celebrity that Jackie Gleason was on Miami Beach. Sure, and this was his town. Yeah.
So let me interrupt. So for people that are younger that listen to our show, tell us, give me an equivalent of the level of star that Jackie Gleason was, not just nationally, but on a local level. Would you say somebody like Letterman?
Much bigger. Jackie Gleason was the face of Miami Beach. He was on a lot of the literature. Come to visit Miami, Jackie Gleason's there, filming his show, resident of the area. He was a bon vivant. He was a man about town. Jackie Gleason was it. And the truth was, Jackie Gleason is still relevant. I mean, The Honeymooners is still an amazing show. And at that stage, especially, and this is, we were in a different era. There was no internet. There were 4 channels of television, maybe 5. Yeah, at max. So the Honeymooners was playing. You had the Jackie Gleason show. He had movies coming out, Smokey and the Bandit, which I don't think was out yet. But, there was a lot going on with Jackie Gleason. But locally, he was it. The truth was, you go back to local celebrities in Miami. Jackie Gleason, it was one. Meyer Lansky, which everybody knows Meyer Lansky, Godfather relation to he was allegedly involved in organized crime for years, but
Meyer Lansky was essentially the character of Hyman Roth, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was. These were the local celebrities, and
I'm not
so
going to throw out the name Skipper Chuck, but that
but
that
let's
was
be
close.
honest. That's a big. He was a big fucking deal.
Yeah,
you know, he was. Locally, Skipper Chuck was a big deal because in this, our world was smaller in the 70s. It wasn't what we had
Skipper
now.
Chuck, for the uneducated, was our Captain Kangaroo.
That's right. He was our local captain. I was actually on the Skipper Chuck show once.
Wow. Now, wait a minute. I did not know about that.
Oh, well, I mean, is
there a videotape a la Michael Scott of you coming on wearing a suit with your hair slicked back?
I have fingers crossed that I hope that this actually is out. It's not, but I was a member of his audience, and he came out and he always comes out and he talks to the kids. I was 6, maybe 7 years old max, and he sat next to me, and I told him that I had a cold, and he got up and moved. And that's all I remember.
So it wasn't like all I want for Christmas is for someone to like me and be my friend.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't as sad as peace, love, and happiness. Remember, it wasn't that. But actually, it was interesting. The musical guest that day was Barry Manilow.
Wow.
And yeah, this was, I think,
your brush with greatness.
I didn't get to meet him, but this is when Mandy was coming out. So this would have been, I guess, early 70s. But it was a big deal. But getting back to Jackie Gleason, so we did not know that Jackie was in the building. I guess they had kept him in the back, so there was no buzz about it. And when he made his way down the aisle, everybody stood up. There was this buzz going through the crowd, which was huge. And he gets in the ring and he's waving to the crowd, which I remember. He's dressed great. He's got on a jacket. He's tanned. He's got his mustache. He just looks, dapper Jackie Gleason. And I guess he talks to the baby faces. I maybe shook their hands, and he goes over.
Who Harley was working that night?
I don't.
Okay. Just wondering. Go ahead.
Yeah. I've got it. I've got it somewhere, so I'd have to go through it. But he walks over to the heels, Harley being one, and I think he puts his hand out to shake it, and Harley won't shake his hand, if I'm remembering correctly. And Jackie Gleason's like, you won't shake my hand. And Harley starts to read him the riot act. And I think Harley then challenges Jackie to punch him. And I think he's poking him in the chest. And Jackie Gleason winds up, decks Harley, and you would have thought Andre just nailed Harley. A credit to the true professional when 60-year-old Jackie Gleason hits you and you sell it like $1 million.
Yeah. So let me read you the article as published in the After magazine. Credit given to columnist, entertainment columnist Hy Gardner. It says comedian Jackie Gleason made news on the wrestling front when he made a guest appearance on Miami, Florida's Convention Hall. While Harley Race was waiting for his opponent to enter the ring, the announcer, aware that Gleason, a big wrestling fan, was in the arena, asked Jackie to take a bow from the ring. Race grabbed the microphone and, to everyone's surprise, yelled, quote, "Jackie Gleason means no more to me than any of you bums sitting here in the audience. He's just a big, fat bum." As reported, did you like my Harley Race impression, by the way?
That was really good.
I put a little gravel in the voice there. As reported by entertainment columnist Hy Gardner in a Florida newspaper, Gleason assumed a fighter stance, confronted Race, and demanded, "What did you call me?" Race repeated his insult. Jackie punched Harley with a left to the body and a right to the head. Race reeled, recovered, and started towards Jackie, bent on pummeling the non-pro. Other wrestlers rushed into the ring to Jackie's defense. Gleason was rushed into the ring by a large number of special police. They had special police in the arena that night, Barry, and taken to a dressing room. Race's reaction afterwards, Gleason's a fat... Oh, I'm sorry, wait a minute. Gleason's a fat bum. I'd like to get a match with him and show him I'm the great one, not him. So, good stuff. I was great to see. I'm sure Jeff Gardner will come on our board and regale us with other side facts if he was there that night. So, just good stuff and a great memory from CWF days. And like you said, at a time when Harley Race was the booker and doing a fantastic job. So now, Barry, let's get on to something that I'm sure is that's the kind of thing that can start a good Barry Rose rant. And I know the folks out there like a good Barry Rose rant. Oh, Barry, it's time to bring up your friend Hannibal. We haven't had a good Hannibal story in at least a couple of weeks. Barry, you had the misfortune of deciding to go, was it to YouTube?
Yeah, so I think I was surfing around the internet yesterday and I stumbled upon it, and somebody had posted in another Facebook group. I don't think it's any of the Arcadian Vanguard things, and it basically said, and it wasn't douching on Hannibal, but it said, I feel really bad for Charlie Haas. When I saw this, my first instinct was he's 48 years old. He's been out of wrestling for years. He's just not in condition. And then you start to watch the video. And, Jeff, you spent 30 something years in the courthouse. There are certain signs when somebody is clearly on drugs. And so Charlie Haas gives every impression that he was either tweaking or something, but he keeps doing their lower jaw. And it's really alarming. He looks absolutely terrible. He did say he's been going through a divorce. I forgot, too, he was married to the very lovely Jackie Gata. Jackie Gata was on Tough Enough, which was that WWE show where they would train people and then give the winner a contract. And I believe she actually worked in the WWE for a short time. They had 4 kids. They're in the process or are divorced. And he is now mounting some sort of comeback. Apparently, he does realize that his day is past, but he wants to offer what he knows is maybe a trainer or something like that. So I started to watch the video, and I got to tell you, it was devastating, because this is my opinion, because I had somebody disagree with me on our Facebook group saying that I don't see it. But again, having been around people on drugs, he appears that he's got a serious, serious drug issue, and it comes off really sad. This is not a belligerent asshole guy that's on drugs. This is a guy that looks like he's been beaten down by life, is very sad, very depressed, and appears to be in the throes of a raging drug addiction. That was my take on it. If you disagree, more power to you. But as I was watching it, one of the mantras, Jeff, that we've had for CWF Legends Fan Fest is, I won't book anybody that is high on drugs. I'm not going to put somebody out that is on opioids and is completely pilled out of their mind. And I don't want to take somebody who is mentally incapable. Danny Hodge came up. Danny's been suffering from dementia or Alzheimer's the last few years. As much as I wanted Danny Hodge, I don't want to put a guy in the throes of something like that in front of people. It's not fair to anyone. It's not fair to the people paying for a ticket. And it's not fair to Danny Hodge or anybody who goes through that. The same token, and I've mentioned this, Billy Jack Haynes at one point, I ran into him and his promoter told me he's just tired. And I think I can tell the difference between somebody who's tired and somebody who's clearly on opioids. And at that point, Billy Jack was unbooked, allegedly. He was unbooked. So when I saw this, I was really taken aback. I felt really bad for Charlie Haas, but I really felt that if you're exploiting a guy who's going through something as horrific as this for money, which is all this comes down to, that you're the lowest bottom feeding scum possible. You're profiting off of somebody else's misery. And it's not the first time he's done it. He did it with Just Incredible. He's done it with numerous other people. And I think he would make a justification to say, hey, people want to see this kind of shit or something like that. You know what? There are a certain segment of people certain segment of the population that does want to see it. At the same time, if you're exploiting somebody's drug addiction for profit, you seriously need to go fuck yourself. You seriously are a fucking scumbag. And I just, when I saw it, I was just I was hurt. It was really bizarre, Jeff, because I felt like this guy, he comes across as this sweet guy who is just getting his ass kicked by life and the drug addiction. And for Hannibal, to toss him $200, if even, which he may not have even paid him for this, and then to put it up, and there's a buzz about it. And the buzz is, come see Charlie Haas. He looks like he's on drugs. People are going to click, and every click, money goes in the pocket of this Canadian asshole. So I was pretty pissed off yesterday, to be honest with you. And I didn't convey it as much as I could have conveyed it. But honestly, you're a fucking pimp. If you do something like this, you're a pimp. You are taking somebody else's misery for your profit. That's exactly what it is.
No, what I was going to say is, if this was the first time that Hannibal had done something like this, you could say, this was not a very cool move by Hannibal to do this, to take advantage of somebody. But no, as you pointed out, he's done this before. And, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Fool me 25 times, you're a fucking scumbag. And that's all the time and attention that Hannibal, quite frankly, deserves from this Peabody Award-winning podcast. And I think you'll agree with me on that, Barry. So a couple things real quick before we get to some other parts of the show. I want to give a shout-out to Jesus Salas Rodriguez. Sent me a little something for Christmas. Took 3 weeks to fucking get here from Puerto Rico, Jesus. But other than that, I want to thank you for the guava jelly roll. Barry has
got one.
Yes, you got one. Did you enjoy it?
I ate it. My wife ate it. My daughter ate it. So yes, we all ate it. But yeah,
so,
I did enjoy
it. We want to give a big shout out to you and say thank you so much for that, my man. Also, slightly more somber note. Friend of the show and member of our Facebook group, Shard Johnson, is in the hospital with a heart issue right now. He posted, or a family member posted a picture of him. And I told him on the board, and I'm going to repeat it, Shard, you go out and you just kick this thing right in the ass. He's got, I believe, a congestive heart failure, but he's fighting it. It's not anything that's imminent, but we want you to get better, my man, get back on the board and regale us with tales of what you went through, and the brothership is behind you.
Jeff, I believe he has COVID again as well.
Oh, well, that's just, makes it all that much better. So, but Shard, we're thinking of you, my man. Go out there and kick this thing right in the ass. Barry, I know you're with me on that.
Oh yeah, I love Shard. Shard and I message, and he was sending me messages yesterday. We were talking about his nurses. One of them's really hot, so at least he has his priorities.
What's her name? Nurse Goodbody.
Nurse Goodbody. You remember Nurse?
Yes,
Goodbody?
I remember Nurse Goodbody.
I'm friends with her on Facebook, by the way. Did you know that?
I think we got a future guest lined up.
I think we can. I'll make. Here, I got the phone in my hand. I'll make that call, But yeah, Shard he's a good guy. He's got a great sense of humor. Shard's been through, and we certainly don't want to dwell on it, but Shard emotionally, I think, has been through some really sad things over the last couple of years. The loss of his son, which was a few years ago. And I got to say, I really do like the guy. He's had a lot of health issues lately, but you've got the power of several thousand brotherships. The 3 best friends, Jeff, that Shard never knew he had, which is yourself, me, and sweet Lou Kipilman. We are all in your corner, Shard.
Amen to that, brother. And I do want to mention, by the way, there was one other person, I'm doing this from memory. I hope I get the name right. I think it was Paul Boudreau posted today that he's going through some stuff right now. So, Paul, we're also in your corner, my man. The brothership is here for you if you need to reach out. You did post something, and I hope you can get through that situation. Want to tell you a quick story about something that happened. Jamie Ward, friend of the show, posted the other day a suggestion that through this whole COVID situation that we've been going through for the last year, your letter carriers, Barry, have been on the job through rain, sleet, snow, and COVID. Apparently, they're out there busting their asses. So he said, maybe thank them for the effort. Maybe give them a little something for the effort. So Mrs. Bowdren and I decided we're going to give them a gift card. Our local postal carrier is a very nice lady. We're going to give her a gift card to a place to get a little something to eat. So we're sitting and my wife was at work on Christmas Eve. She had to work till like 3:00 or so. And she's texting me. She goes, did the postal lady come yet? Did you give her the card? I said, no, not yet. I haven't seen her. So wife gets there and then we got to go out and run an errand. And lo and behold, we were looking for the postal truck or a little Jeep or whatever. And we see her. So we pull up alongside of her and I'm kind of waving my hand to her and she's in the middle of doing something, organizing some mail. And she doesn't see me. So my wife goes to get out of the car and she goes to walk in front of the Jeep. Okay. And it was at that moment that the Jeep began to move forward and it actually bumped into Mrs. Bowdren. Okay. That would have been a hell of a Christmas Eve.
Wow.
And I would have blamed Jamie Ward for the whole fucking thing, by the way.
Sure.
But anyway, so it bumps her and she kind of turns and looks at me and the lady keeps going. Did not see my wife at all. Oh. Okay. And Kim was saying, she goes, usually I will get out of the car and go to the rear of the vehicle, but this time she was going to go to the front. And she said, I never do that. I don't know why I did that. And so she gets bumped. We move the car forward. We give the card with the gift card in it to the lady. She's very appreciative and very nice. I said, did you tell the lady that she bumped into you? And she goes, no. She goes, I didn't want to ruin her evening or something because I'm sure she would have been mortified. But she goes, it was just like one of those crazy things. And it was our own little Christmas Eve miracle that Mrs. Bowdren wasn't hurt because that sure would have put a damper on a Christmas Eve, Bear.
Yeah, slightly, right? Getting us. So where was the gift card to?
Burger King, if you must know. They flame grill their burgers there. So. Okay, there he is, Mr. Rose, drinking from a Burger King cup right now. I am, of course, drinking from a lovely QT cup myself. But so I'll raise a cola slushy to the work.
A nice slice of the Hershey pie.
Exactly.
Yes. Well, funny too. I've been to a Burger King. This would be my second time in probably 2 years, and my daughter went to Burger King. My daughter now is 16. Driving, all of her friends drive, so they go out for fast food. There's nothing else to do at this stage. You can't go in a restaurant. There's nowhere to go. So they go to fast food every night. She's discovered Burger King and loves it. So she's like, Dad, can we go to Burger King today? I'm like, sure, we can go. And they've got this good deal, though. I will tell you, Jeff, for $10, 2 Whoppers, 2 fries, 2 Cokes, $10.
I'm hoping that's not all for Zoe.
No.
Because I was going to say, if it is, her cholesterol level is going to go way up.
Yeah. No, definitely not. But that's a very, very nice gesture. And you're right. And I'll tell you, it was a sad thing as I took a drive today. We had a couple errands to run, and we did hit Burger King. A lot of the local businesses have actually boarded up. And I thought that maybe January we would see it. My local Pet Value, and every Pet Value in the U.S. is closed down. Today is their last day. Sonic, Jeff. Fucking Sonic closed up over the weekend. And then there were 4 or 5 other smaller businesses that have closed up, but it's frightening. It's absolutely frightening. And I think we're going to see come January, February, the first quarter, January, February, March of next year, the amount of businesses. So if you can get out, if you can support your mom and pop stores, the people trying to make ends meet, businesses like Sonic and Burger King, there's millions of dollars behind them. So if a Sonic closes, it's a corporate decision to maximize profits somewhere else. But if your mom and pop business closes, that's a mom and pop that probably have lost everything that they own. So please support them.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I was watching the Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives the other day, and they were featuring, they had I think it was a 1-hour show all about restaurants in the greater Philadelphia area. So, and I was going to reach out to you, but of course you're a very important and busy man. So, God forbid I should do that. Well, anyway. Speaking of very important people, like that transition there, Barry, smooth as silk. We are now going to go to our interview with the Lady Maxine, as she's going to tell us a little bit about her time in CWF and training with the fabulous Moolah. All right, Barry, we are happy to be joined at this moment by, I'm going to just go ahead and say her name, and I'm going to see how many of our listeners would know the name Janine Mihoset. Barry, do you think anybody out there is going to know Janine by her shoot name?
I think anybody that has purchased a copy of her book is going to know exactly who you're talking about, Jeff.
Okay, well, we are happy to be joined by CWF. I'm going to call her a CWF legend because she was at the CWF Legends Fan Fest in beautiful downtown Lutz, Florida. It is the Lady Maxine. Janine, we are so happy to have you join us. How are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. Now, I'm only Lady Maxine when I'm in a good mood. When I'm mostly Mad Maxine because I'm pretty mad about 2020, the worst year of all.
I don't want to get into your personal life here, but
I'm just talking about the shitstorm that 2020 has been. The dumpster fire.
There's no doubt about that. You are absolutely correct. So we are happy to have you join us. Wanted to talk with you a little bit about your time in CWF and in the wrestling business. I know you have a book out, and we're gonna mention that too. So Barry, we of course were joined by Janine at, as I mentioned, the CWF Legends Fan Fest that we had back at the old, what was it, the American Legion Hall or the Elks Club? What was it, Bear?
Yeah, it was it was an American Legion Hall in Lutz, Florida. It was really one of the most unique buildings I think I had ever been in for any sort of wrestling event. Jeff, it really was like stepping back into the 70s. We have, and Janine can tell you, but we have since upgraded. We are now in a hotel, and as we were just talking off air, if
Penzer money, that's what it is. We upgraded.
Oh, yeah.
Penzer money, yeah.
Cash money, Dave Penzer. But let me tell you, Jeff, Janine, I'm going to call her Janine. Again, a lot of us know her as Mad Maxine or Lady Maxine.
I answer to all.
She was one of the most fun and engaging superstars we have ever had. And I don't think anybody has ever done what Maxine did, in the sense that, she doesn't have the mohawk any longer, sadly, which was a fantastic look, but she brought a faux hawk, and she had the mohawk, but she had a whole table set up. She was just everything. And Janine, you look like you were having so much fun.
I really did. I really did. That it was just really heartwarming to, see that people actually, even though I didn't wrestle for a very long time, like some of the, the greats like Leilani Kai or Susan Green. But to have been remembered by the fans, I really appreciated that. And it was just really fun to rub elbows and to kind of hear, how old they were when they saw me wrestle, which was a long time ago, let me tell you.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about the start of your career? What got you interested in? Were you a pro wrestling fan, or I know you played some basketball in college and such, but were you a fan going back to when you were a kid?
That was the funny thing. I had not watched wrestling or been a fan at all. I was just looking for a really out there kind of project. I was a young journalist, and I wanted to do something where I lived the project and then wrote about it. And, I had a hero named George Plimpton who used to, he would become a professional football player and baseball player and golfer. And he did it with all the professional teams. And then he would write about it. I always thought that was such a cool idea.
Paper Lion.
Yes, exactly. I'm glad you know that. So I wanted to do that. It just took me 35 years to write the Chronicles of Mad Maxine, my book. And in the end, I wrote it as a novel rather than a memoir. It was just much easier to kind of get the feeling of the thing without the 100% factual. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it. I mean, there's a little gray area in wrestling. Would you agree?
I'd agree, Jeff.
I see your point. Absolutely.
Yeah, and so gray area in wrestling, gray area in my book, but. Anyway, so the way I got into it, I went to a biker party in Brooksville, Florida, with a friend of mine, and it was just this huge farm, and people were playing, they were playing horseshoes and doing arm wrestling and drinking lots of beer and eating barbecue. It was just a great summer scene. And a friend of mine was dating a guy who wrestled. And I thought that was super cool. So we talked about it for a while. And then turns out he said his mom wrestled. And I was like, what? I mean, because I actually didn't think, I knew women wrestled, but I just didn't even think that women who wrestled also had families. So that was Beverly Shade, who was living in Tampa at the time. So I just kind of toyed with the idea. It was like one of the projects that I was kind of thinking about doing. The other ones, I thought I might join the Renaissance Festival and become like a troubadour. And then I also thought I might go to Chad, Africa, and cover the invasion that, Libya was invading Chad at the time. And I had a friend who was a water engineer who was going over there to do some humanitarian work. And so there were like 3 contestants for what I was going to do. And one was too hard, one was too easy. And then I picked the middle one. Well, wrestling did not turn out to be easy, let me tell you.
Gotcha. Well, if you're just joining us, and the first question is, where the hell have you been if you're just joining us? Our guest today is Lady Maxine, Mad Maxine. Janine Miyoset is her real name. She is also, Jeff, an accomplished author. The book, The Chronicles of Mad Maxine, just released during COVID over the last few months. And she is offering autographed copies. Jeff, only $14 postage paid. We are going to be posting all the information on Facebook in our Facebook group. You'll be able to order the book directly through Janine and be able to get that autograph. But so I have a question. So I've read, I remember the first chapter of the book was released in, I think it was like 2014, 5 or 6 years ago, and it was Barrel House, if I'm correct.
That's right.
Yeah, and so it was fantastic. Now, there's a lot of Moolah stuff in there, but the book is I guess it's a fictionalized account of your experiences in the mid-1980s. So with that, I mean, obviously, a lot of the Moolah stuff doesn't seem like it's actually fictionalized. Would that be correct?
I would say, some of it is, some of it isn't. Kind of like the feeling of it for me is the part that is not fictionalized. I mean, the fact that when you paid $1,500 to be trained by the fabulous Moolah, that meant that you were not actually trained by her, but by Donna Christian-Tallo, who was a phenomenal wrestler and a really good trainer. But, going in, I thought Moolah was going to be training me, as I think a lot of people would expect. But she really did not get involved until you were pretty close to your first match. So, yeah.
Well, did you actually see her on a daily basis at her training school or no?
Yeah, she had a big old house right next to the training ring. So, we did see her quite a bit. But, sometimes she was on the road or doing the administrative side of things. But, yeah, we saw her regularly.
So I'm just curious, besides Donna Christianello, who are some of the other ladies that were involved in the training process? Or that maybe were students at the same time as you?
My bestie was, she went by Angèle at the time, but she's better known as Luna Vachon. So she and I kind of came up together. Peggy Fowler was she was already a full-fledged wrestler, but we became friendly. And there were others who were in training, but who never really did much with it. I mean, they might have had a few matches, but their careers didn't take off for whatever reason. At the time, I lived next door to Leilani Kai, who's still a friend, and Vicky Otis, Princess Victoria was at the camp. It was really, it was kind of the heyday. Mid '80s was a big time for wrestling, for lady wrestling, because there was that rock and roll and wrestling that Cyndi Lauper and Lou Albano. I don't know how many people remember that, but it really kind of made it kind of put lady wrestling on the map. So Wendy Richter became the proxy for Cyndi Lauper, and then Moolah wrestled on behalf of Albano, and that was just a big fun thing that happened. And I didn't last too long with Moolah or WWF, which it was what was called at the time. But had I done that, they were grooming me to wrestle Wendy, but it just it was as they say, it was a little too hot. I had to get out of the kitchen.
I've been there, so I understand that too. So, Janine, were you there when Moolah, as the masked spider lady, reclaimed the title from Wendy?
No, I read about that, and kind of the disaster that was. But it was after the fact. I had already gone down to Florida and had gotten connected with Chief Wahoo McDaniel, who was just an amazing person. And he was the booker at the time for Championship Wrestling from Florida. And Gordon Soley, of course, was the announcer. And so I missed that opportunity. There were a few times when I kind of left the room before the party got started. But in the end, I just made the decisions that I made kind of based on the information right in front of me. A few kind of what ifs. I mean, it would have been really cool to have wrestled Wendy. I mean, she was just amazing and super fit and, at the top of her game. So I would like to have done that, but it was not to be.
Just curious,
Yeah.
What did you think of the locker room of the WWF at the time? Like, how were the ladies treated, that sort of thing? Moolah kind of kept a pretty tight hold on me, at least when I was up there. I mean, people were pretty friendly, and it was not. I didn't see any improprieties go on. I think that probably did happen at times. I think I've seen things on Twitter, and I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that has happened. But when I was there, I didn't notice anything awry or any kind of misbehavior. People were just they give you their little soft handshakes, which, the first time it happened, and a big burly guy gave me this tiny little handshake. It was just like, I was like very surprised about that. But when you think about it, you don't want somebody who, pumps iron every day to give you a really strong handshake. That just is not smart.
Yeah, absolutely too. So one of the stories in your book, and I don't know if this part is fictionalized, but you do talk about Fabulous Moolah and about an underage wrestler who Moolah has pimped out to a podiatrist with a taste for straining lady muscles. So I don't know if if I should be asking you, is this fictionalized or not? But when you just talked about that you didn't really see a lot of improprieties in the WWF, I'm assuming that your time with Moolah, that you did see a lot of things which really caused you to shake your head.
Well, I was, I had, in my friendships with the other wrestlers, I was aware that there was somebody out west, a doctor who Moolah would send wrestlers to, and they would be paid $500. And he would say that he wanted to take their pictures, their photos, and so they kind of looked at it as a modeling gig. But in truth, it was an opportunity for him to get his rocks off. And so, I talked to the guy. People have said, "Oh, that didn't happen." It didn't happen to me. It didn't happen to a lot of the wrestlers. The people I think it happened to were the underage. There were some underage women who came in. Their parents or their guardians gave them permission to be there. And Moolah saw somebody who was vulnerable and took advantage. I have never said that this happened to all the wrestlers. I think the women who had been wrestling for a while, they didn't go out there. They wouldn't put up with it. I mean, and if they had gone out there and he tried to do something, they would have beat his ass. So it did happen for sure. And I think it's a big. I think it's kind of like it's not surprising. What is surprising to me is that when they WWE tried to name a match in Moolah's honor, there was such a huge public outcry. That was 2018. That that she did not deserve this honor, and the reasons for that were the fact that she did pimp some of the women out. The fact that she was just, basically ran a company store on the property. It was a beautiful hunk of land with a sweet little lake in the middle of it. And we all lived in these converted army duplexes. And it was just, if you didn't have a part-time job that you could go to while you were training 4 hours a day, you ended up going into debt to her. And the agreement was that when you started wrestling, you'd pay her back. But once you're in debt to somebody, and you don't have the ability to pay them back, they can really kind of get away with murder. So I think she took advantage in a lot of different ways. And I know she took, she had all the money from WWF come to her. So the women didn't know what they'd actually been paid. They just know what Moolah gave her. So there was all kinds of stuff going on.
If you don't mind, I want to backtrack as to a couple of things
Sure.
You mentioned at the very beginning. You were talking about Beverly Shade, that you had a meeting with a friend's boyfriend whose mom was Beverly Shade. Would we know the name of the guy, Beverly Shade's son? Was it a name that was like familiar to wrestling fans or no?
I remember his name is Chris, but I may have that wrong. It was. I think that has gone into the mist of time.
Okay.
I'm sorry to say I don't remember.
No, that's fine. And at the school, did you ever have the opportunity to train or meet Judy Martin? Judy has been a guest on our show in the past. That's why I was wondering.
Yes, she was one of the veterans who was there. One of the the women who was really at the top of the So she was often on the road, at matches. So she went out quite a bit. Desiree Peterson was also there.
Sure.
It was really kind of like Moolah's. It was the best I think that Moolah had ever had.
So I'm curious, just because I actually knew her personally and was unaware of your connection with her. I actually went to one of her weddings. You were talking about Angel Vachon. Tell us memories of training with Angel.
She was just so friendly and so sweet. She was in her early 20s at the time, and she really reached out and was, made me feel comfortable when, I did not get that feeling from a lot of the veteran wrestlers. I'm sure that they looked at us and thought, well, I don't even know if she's going to make it through training. I'm not going to become friends with her until I know that she's the real deal. Angel did not hold back at all. She was willing to try anything in the ring. Can I just tell you, I had to learn how to do the flying head scissors, which for somebody who's 6'2" was not the easiest thing in the world. You throw yourself in the air and you grab somebody around the neck. You got to place their neck in between your ankles. They catch you, and then they do a forward bump, and then you end up still connected on the mat, and you're working them with your ankles. And I couldn't get it. And Luna volunteered to catch me. And of course, she was maybe 5'6" on a good day, and very, very thin, and not the muscly woman that she became later. She was just a slender wrestler at that point. But she caught me and did a beautiful bump. And after that, I didn't have any fear about doing the flying head scissors. Although that was not my the move that I did very much. But she would always kind of step up and and give a person a hand if they needed help out in the ring. She was very generous.
Yeah, Jeff, how many weddings of Moolah of Angels did you go to?
I went to the legendary one that where she married Tom the Punisher Nash, aka the Blackheart. It was one of the legendary events in South Florida wrestling history. I will just say that.
I've heard the stories. Okay, so getting back to Max. So we were just talking prior about your time spent in Florida working underneath Wahoo McDaniel, which was the booker at the time, and they brought you in. You got a big push really right off the get-go, and you were put into a couple of high-profile feuds. One was with the manager Percy Pringle, who later gained a lot of fame as the manager of The Undertaker, Paul Bearer, and the other was the wife/valet of the Hustler, Rip Rogers, his wife valet at the time, Miss Brenda. So what was that
Not
like?
A flea bag. Not a flea bag. We have to say that.
Yeah.
Brenda Britton was just awesome. She had been a dancer in her youth, in her younger days. And so she really helped me out with the costumes. And Rip, who I think is still living. I think he's still living is he in Tampa or that area?
Indiana, if I'm correct.
Oh, okay. Didn't know that. I just assumed everybody retires to Florida. So, that was really fun. That was the first kind of storyline that got told, and that was really super fun. And took it all over the state. And I was so scared when I got into the ring. I'll tell you what, it really didn't kick in for me until about maybe 20 matches in, and I finally kind of understood, I'm supposed to be having a good time out here, and the fans are really on my side. I don't need to, I was just worried about messing up. And, but they were veterans. They knew what to do, and they, knew how to work, and kind of took me along and kind of rounded out my education that had started in Columbia, South Carolina. Now, I have to say my favorite time was with Percy Pringle. He was just the best mouth. He just made me laugh all the time. It was not only what he said, it was how he said it, the kind of crazy faces he would show. He would just like give you this sidelong glance, and I couldn't help but laugh. And I remember we had this gig or a match in Orlando. It was huge, it was sold out, and everybody was there to see me and Percy wrestle. And I had to pick that guy up, and I am sure he must have weighed, it was just under 300 pounds at the time. I got him up and did a body slam, and that was the heaviest person I ever had to slam. But we just had a really good time. And the nice thing about that was they brought in Peggy Fowler, Peggy Lee Leather, as Percy's sister. And then we just, because, Peggy, Angèle and I had all moved to the Miami area together. And eventually all of us moved up to the Tampa area, and we all got work with championship wrestling from Florida. And then Angèle became, she came in as a reporter named Gertrude, and then got sucked into the satanic vortex that was Kevin Sullivan's Army of Darkness, and that was just wild to see her transform from this, angel, this little cherubic, blonde-haired, sweetheart, into this, shaved half of her head and drew spidery, webs all over her head, and just really got into it. And the thing about it is her aunt was Vivienne Vachon, and she comes from a wrestling, French-Canadian wrestling family, and her aunt was a really, hardcore heel. And even though Angèle looked like a baby face, you would definitely think that's what she would be. It's the easiest thing in the world. There was no way that she wanted to be anything but a heel. That was all she ever wanted to be.
So if you don't mind me asking, and without getting any kind of specifics, how did you find the pay when you were in CWF? Do you think it was fair? Do you think you were underpaid or what?
I didn't really compare myself to I didn't know what the guys were making, but, generally, you'd get, like an average of $50 a night. And when it was really good, really sold good house, you might get 100. But it was, like, for example, this was the big match in Orlando. I knew people were there to see me. I mean, we had enormous luck, with the TV promos, and everybody was really on board, and there was a lot of heat, but it was not really reflected in my paychecks. So, I was pretty happy because I was working, 7 days a week most of the time, and kind of felt good to make, when I was really rolling in it, it was like, so I'd make $700 in a week. And I thought that was pretty good. And of course I didn't have any idea what the men were paid. So the thing is that, it's if you had a RV or something like that, you wouldn't be having to shell out for the motels every night. And of course that really eats into what you're able to kind of keep in your pockets. So, you do a match, you get in the car. Of course, I'm sure everybody knows about this, probably seen the movie The Wrestler, which is pretty accurate depiction. Get in the car, you drive to the next town, you get a, cheap hotel. And, if you're lucky, you find a gym the next morning to do a workout and then do it again that night. And you just keep going and going and going. Kind of wears you out after a while.
So I'm curious.
Would have to.
I'm curious. I know right after CWF, you spent some time up in the southeastern area around Alabama, and I know you worked a program with Adrian Street and Miss Linda. So first of all, how did you enjoy doing that? And what was the money comparable to Florida? Was it more or less about the same?
It was about the same, I would say. Yeah, and that was wild. Because I had such a strong kind of out there look, they always kind of, I always got paired with, people who also had kind of weird looks, which was A-okay with me. I enjoyed that. And, they also, like, I had Wahoo was a partner. Tyree Price was a Haitian wrestler. And then there was a Cuban assassin. I tended to get paired with people who are kind of non-traditional, which and Coco Samoan, not to forget. I wrestled with him, as a partner for, quite a bit, and really enjoyed that. So anyway, yeah, it was about the same, the pay was, to answer your question.
Gotcha. So once again, we are joined by Janine Mioset. You know her as Lady Maxine or Mad Maxine. Spent some time in the mid-'80s working several territories, primarily in the South. Also went up to New York, spent a little time working alongside Moolah. She has written a book. It is called The Chronicles of Mad Maxine. You can get an autographed copy directly from Maxine, only $14. Postage is paid. It's autographed. This is a collector's item. This is the kind of stuff that we tell you want to get a copy of, because on eBay in about 10 years, this book's going to be up and it's be going for $500. So jump in now, get your copies. We're going to be posting all the information on our Facebook page, how you can contact Janine directly. If you're shy and you don't want to go to Janine for fear of getting your ass kicked, maybe understandable, maybe not. You can always go to Amazon. But as Janine has told us, it is actually cheaper to go through her. So we encourage that. So Janine, looking at the territories, you worked Florida, You worked in continental Alabama, North Florida up there. You spent some time in Mid-South working for the Cowboy, Bill Watts, and you were up in New York. What was your favorite, I want to say your favorite memory in professional wrestling, and I don't know if that's really fair, but what was your favorite territory that you were in, or where did you feel the most comfortable?
Florida by a long shot, because I had lived in Tampa for 7 years. And I had lots of friends in the Tampa area. And, just to be able to come home to a place where I had, already had a kind of fan base and knew the state pretty well. And, I just think Florida is a very unique state. Its fans are really, hardcore, and they followed, they would follow the stories, and, they would come out for the matches. And it was really fun for me because, it was the family thing. People would come, and it'd be like from the grandparents down to the little kids, and then they'd show up in line to get a photograph autographed. And I just really enjoyed seeing the young fans come out and encouraging them to do well in school and be brave and all that kind of thing. It was really heartwarming.
Well, as we slowly begin to wrap up here, I have two final questions I wanted to ask you. Barry very briefly touched on your time in the UWF, where you were working alongside the Sheepherders and Jack Victory. Did you have fun working for Bill Watts, or was it more like, oh, crap, this is turning into a job?
I think it was kind of the latter. At the time, I was based in Baton Rouge, and it was a pretty lonely period of time. I did not really connect with Jack or even the Sheepherders, to be honest. I don't think they had much respect for the women wrestlers, or maybe it was just me, who knows. And I also didn't really connect with Dark Journey at the time, although we've since become friends. So it was just, I think, it could all come down to the fact that I think I was nearing the end of my time in wrestling. And I wanted to get the full real experience. I didn't want to be, just go in, dip in and dip out. I really wanted to have the experience. And it was then that I realized, okay, I think I've done this for almost 2 years. And, I've earned my living as a wrestler. And I think it's now time to, go back to journalism, actually. So that was kind of the toughest time for me. I was pretty lonely. I lived in a by-the-week hotel on Airport Drive in Baton Rouge, and there was a man there who lived there with his kid. Or there were a couple little boys who were there, and it was just a little bit of normalcy, just to hang out with the boys and take them to the library, and just kind of innocent fun. And in fact, I'm in touch with one of the kids who grew up to have like a really interesting career and living over in Europe and doing all sorts of crazy things. But I think I was just at that point just was lonely for my family and for friends. And if you're not partnered up or you don't have good friendships with the other wrestlers, it can be a pretty lonely time.
Yeah. So your career was fairly brief. You are just looking at a couple of years. Now that you're able to look back some, 35 years, 30 years later, which is actually hard to believe, but for both of us, right? It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I used to have a full head of hair. What happened? But do you look back at it and go, yeah, I wish I would have stuck around a little bit longer to see what could have happened? You really were so unique at that time. Now it's a little different because right. I think that there's certainly a trend over the last couple of years to get out of that kind of cookie cutter mold, yes, and to offer people that are looking unique. Do you feel that had you stuck around for, another 2, 3, 4 years, that you would have had a bigger impact? But do you regret that you didn't do that?
I have no regrets at all. I'll be honest. I really enjoyed the time I wrestled, and there were a lot of things that I learned that that I applied to my life after wrestling. That I think just that you can be a badass and, you can stand up for yourself. I mean, there were just all sorts of life lessons in wrestling. How to take a fall, periodically a person's going to fall down. It's good to know how to fall. So no, I think I held on as long as I could. And when I left, it was time. So no regrets at all.
So just as we wrap up here, I have to mention that you really are kind of a woman of the world, as some of the different things that you've done in your life. As I was reading about you, the fact that you worked in the National Institute of Aging and for the National Human Genome Research Institute. Damn, how'd you have time to wrestle?
I always really enjoyed science when I was in high school and college, and I just had the opportunity to get on with National Institutes of Health, and I spent 20 years there, and just really, just love kind of learning about wild, crazy research that's going on. I really, the opportunity to talk to people who were like Nobel Prize winners and to interview them about stuff I had no clue about, and getting them to explain it to me in really simple terms so that I could write about it. It was really, it was great. I totally enjoyed that. And I'm still doing science writing, actually.
So, well, listen, Janine, we really want to thank you for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure. Barry, one last time, why don't you mention where folks can get Janine's book?
Right. They can go directly through Janine. You can go to Amazon, but again, you're going to be paying more money. That copy's not going to be autographed. You'd have to be nuts to do that. The book is called The Chronicles of Mad Maxine. We will have all of the information on our Facebook page this upcoming Tuesday when the episode drops. The important thing to remember here, Janine accepts personal checks, apparently,
Yep.
and also Venmo. But Janine, no PayPal, am I right?
I actually did figure out how to do that. All I need is the person's email, and I can send a request. So PayPal is also possible.
Well, there you go.
I don't know if you want to take personal checks from some of the people in our group. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, I'm going to wait until those checks clear. Let me tell you.
Well, listen, again, Janine, thanks so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
I really enjoyed it. I hope it didn't talk your ear off.
No, not at all. Thank you so much.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Barry, I know that you enjoyed having the Lady Maxine at the old CWF Legends Fan Fest #1.
Yeah, she's such a vibrant personality. She's so full of life. And, you'll go to a fan fest and, Greg Valentine's one that comes to mind. And when you meet Greg Valentine, you got to walk over and you got to put 2 fingers to touch his artery to make sure he's breathing. Like literally, he's like
that's resting Greg Valentine. That's why he is 24/7.
Yeah, exactly. He's just this super sedate individual. She showed up. She had a faux mohawk. She was wearing shoes that were lifts. I mean, she's already 6 foot. She was probably 6'5", and she had so much fun that day. It's the only time she's ever done a fan fest. And she was, just so engaging with everybody. And she was taking photos and she was pretending to choke people. So I really enjoy her, and I really want to get her back to a fan fest. I really want to read the book. That's what I'm really excited about, Jeff.
Okay, so now it is time, Barry. For the match of the week, we're going to Japan. And we are talking April 20th, 1991, 6-man tag from the rings of All Japan Pro Wrestling. We are talking Jumbo Tsuruta, Akira Taue, Masa Fuchi, taking on Mitsuharu Misawa, Toshiaki Kawada, and Kenta Kobashi. Let me give this match a little context. One of the things that was great about this time period in All Japan was this was when the transition was going on from the guys that were the age of Fuchi and Tsuruta, and they were transitioning to what they call the 4 pillars. The 4 pillars were Taue, Misawa, Kawada, and Kobashi. So you had a segment of the audience that was very aware of what was happening internally within the promotion. This, Barry, as I watched this match, it reminded me very favorably of a match that we've reviewed here before, one of my all-time favorite Japanese matches, which was the New versus Now match in New Japan, which was a 10-man tag. And again, that was because the crowd was so friggin' electric. As in that particular match, it was the younger guys, going against the hierarchy of Inoki and Sakaguchi. Now here in this match, you've got the guys like Misawa and Kobashi and Kawada trying to overthrow the run that Tsuruta had been on. And, as I was watching this match, Barry, what I thought to myself was, you got 4 Hall of Fame caliber wrestlers. You got one who is like a borderline, because Taue, when Brian Last on the 605 always does his Hall of Fame episode, Taue is always one of those guys who's just underneath, just hasn't quite made it. And then Masa Fuchi, Masa Fuchi was a guy that for years was always on Dave Meltzer's annual end of the year Observer Awards, always was mentioned as one of the most underrated guys. Him and Brad Armstrong and Bobby Eaton and Masa Fuchi, those guys, like for about a 5 or 6 year run, were always on there. And of course, Masa Fuchi, another match that we reviewed many episodes ago, Barry, was the match with Eddie Gilbert and Ricky Morton against Atsushi Onita and Masa Fuchi from Tupelo. And so here we have Masa Fuchi again, and one of those guys that, let's be honest, not exactly the most electric performer, very kind of bland, but just incredibly solid. And a guy that probably time has forgot. He may have done some training for Baba with the young boys because he was so solid in the ring, and was a guy that didn't seem to have a big, huge ego. But wow, Barry, I fucking love this match, and I'm very curious what you thought of it.
Yeah, and I really like that little putting everything into context. And you're right about Fuchi.
I try.
Yeah, and Fuchi was a guy, and I guess still is a guy, but he was unspectacular, yet he was kind of flawless in everything that he did. And for years, I think they kept him in the junior heavyweight category because he's a little bit smaller. Taue, you're 100% right. The difference with Taue, I tell you what I see. When Taue is put into a position, especially in tag team matches, that's where I think he excels. In singles matches, Taue, in my opinion, was never at the same level of guys like Kobashi, Tsuruta, Misawa.
It's far easier to hide him in a tag match. He gets exposed in a single, I think.
That's it. That's exactly what it is. But he comes across great in this match, obviously. But in a lot of the tag matches, he really comes across great. So you made a claim, and this is a big claim from somebody that watches, a few wrestling matches per week, but at the same time, over the course of the last 50 years, has probably seen, thousands, if not tens of thousands of wrestling matches. So to say that this is in your top 5 is mind-blowing on a lot of levels. I can't say that I disagree with you, though. I don't know if it makes my top 5 because at this point I'm so clouded with everything I've seen. I don't know where I'm at, but I got to tell you.
Are you calling me Mr. Hyperbole?
No, I'm just saying maybe your memory's a little better than mine, but it's but you know what? I've seen so many matches that it's hard for me to say, but I got to tell you, this match leaves an impression. I will say this is the best 6-man tag match I've ever seen by far. I don't think there's any sort of comparison with any other match. But what really makes this great, there's a lot of things that make this match great. The storytelling. This match tells a story from A to Z. And this match is over 50 minutes. I want to say it's 54, maybe 52 minutes, somewhere right around there. And I generally, after about 25 to 30 minutes, I can start to wander off a bit with my ADD. So that did not happen in this match. This match kept me, and I had a feeling, unfortunately, when you watch YouTube and you see how much time is left, then the finish is coming, because I don't think, had I not seen that, I would have said, the finish is coming up shortly. I kind of feel like these guys were just going to keep on going. The amount of abuse that is just dished out in this match is unbelievable. But the two teams here, so Misawa, Jumbo, it's fantastic. But the tension between Kawada and Taue, Kobashi, who at this point was just coming into his own, there's not this is what I think is amazing. This match is 50 minutes, Jeff. Was there one point in this match that you were bored?
No, not at all.
50
As a matter of fact,
fucking minutes.
To reference what you were saying, is this was a match that when I hit, like, say 20 or 30 minutes, I was going, oh, good. I still got another 20 or 30 minutes left in this match. And, usually it's like, okay, I got another 20 minutes to get to the end of this match. And this was not the case of this match at all. This match was fucking fantastic. And I'll tell you, and I'm interrupting Barry's train of thought. I apologize for that. As I was trying to draw, and Barry said this was the best 6-man match he's ever seen, and I agree with that. I was trying to draw a corollary. And, I can recall 85, 86, maybe into 87, when Worldwide was, Worldwide Wrestling was at its peak. And you would get these matches where it was like Flair, Tully, and Arn taking on Dusty, Magnum, and they'll throw in maybe Manny Fernandez or somebody like that. And those matches are out there, but those matches are usually like 10 to 12 minutes long. And for 10 to 12 minutes, you're watching it and they're like, and of course it's a great action sequence it's completely different from this because they do a lot more brawling outside the ring than the Japanese guys did in this match. But it's a very exciting 10 to 12 minutes. And you're sitting, and of course you got the David Crockett, we're out of time, Tony, we got to go. But this is that plus 4 or 5 times longer. And it continues. And there's not any spot where someone grabs a headlock, lays down on the mat and says, okay, we're going to take the next 5 or 10 minutes and just kind of work a hold here. And this doesn't mean that this is a Young Bucks, kind of match where you're doing all these, as people say, flippy shit. Not at all. I don't know that there was one plancha or a pescado or whatever the fucking words are. I will tell you that I actually marked down the fact that it was, and Barry, I don't know if you noticed this, 33 minutes into the match before the first punch was thrown.
No, I didn't even notice that.
That's fucking amazing. Yeah. That a match with these guys, they were so elite at this point that they could work a 33-minute match before one person. And I want to say that may have been, I think the number of punches thrown was probably less than 5. And for a 50 fucking minute match, that's just incredible. Please continue. I'm sorry.
It is. No, but everything you're saying, I agree with, Jeff. There's so much. Jeff, you were 100% correct.
Check.
That's taken on a life of its own as well.
We have people that wait for that. Go ahead.
They are. That's really taken on a life of its own as well. But it's the storytelling, and I didn't even realize about the punch because I think the match is flawless. First off, and it's amazing. But what I also like about it too, the heels, and when I say the heels, that's a little bit loose because I don't really know. The heels, I guess, would have been Tsuruta, Taue, and Fuchi.
And very subtle.
Very subtle. But at the same way, Kawada's flipping the bird. Like, yes. Did you fucking pop for that? Like, I was like, oh my God, Kawada just shot the bird. That's awesome. So this is as good as it's going to get. I think if you're new to Japanese wrestling, and every so often somebody will pop up in the group and say, I don't know much about Japanese wrestling. I never have gotten into it. You know what? Fuck it. Erase everything. Start off with this match, because this is, if you're not hooked after watching this match, then maybe Japanese wrestling's not going to be for you. But you mentioned something, Jeff, a couple of minutes ago about the difference between, let's say, this 6-man and then a 6-man that would have taken place on Worldwide or one of the NWA syndication shows. And those shows were designed to either get you to an arena or to sell tickets to the next pay-per-view or something like that. These kind of matches that we're seeing, these were the big shows, and they just happened to film them. So we're extremely lucky. And, there was always a lot of talk. You don't really see it as much now, but Jeff, certainly in your heyday,
because I'm not in my heyday anymore. Thank you.
Yeah. Well,
clearly I'm slipping.
Yeah. How dare you? But in your heyday, and when I say your heyday, when you were reviewing matches and you had your top 100 matches and stuff, there was a clear division between the crowds in Japan and the crowds in America. And the crowds in America were terrible. And it's just the way we were conditioned. It's, the crowds in Japan, certainly those lines are blurred now. ROH has blurred those lines. And, some of the groups, is a Pro Wrestling Guerrilla out in California, because you have smart, knowledgeable fans now. But in Japan, the crowd was always smart, always knowledgeable. And they're responsible for elevating a lot of the matches. The crowd for this match, Jeff, boy, they're through the fucking roof.
Oh, yeah. This was crazy stuff. And the fact that they're able to sustain the level of emotion that goes throughout this match for 50 fucking minutes. I mean, you would have left the match and it's like, God, give me a friggin' something to drink and a cigarette, because I'm complete, it's like, it'd be a nice night at the Rose household, for God's sakes. But, it's the emotional ebbs and flows that go through this match that the crowd was able, and Barry was right. And when we say they're a smart crowd, this wasn't, 1,500, because I think this might have been Cork and Hall. This wasn't 1,500 observer readers. It's that these people invested in their time. And because the magazines that were in Japan at this point, whether it was Gong magazine or what was it, Pro Wrestling Sha, I think was the other one, that they didn't treat their audiences like idiots. It was like a magazine. It was like a Time magazine or a Newsweek magazine but for wrestling fans, where they treated the wrestlers like athletes. They gave a backstory on the wrestlers, and you knew about the fact that Misawa, his amateur abilities. You knew that Kawada and Misawa had known each other since they were like really like maybe in high school. They gave these backstories, and you knew how Jumbo had come up through the ranks as an amateur and wrestled in the Olympics and stuff like that. And there was very, the stuff that was kept from the fans is very few and far between. They pretty much let you right in the door. And I think it led to a greater appreciation. You didn't see them as like characters on TV. You saw them as real people. And, that's credit not only to Baba, but that New Japan did that too. And the way the writers, guys like Wally Yamaguchi and people like that, really opened up a vein that the wrestling fan appreciated, and it made him a greater fan of the product that they were seeing.
Yeah, it's again, Jeff, you're making some excellent points with that. So let me ask you a question. And this is, as you were saying this, my mind started, and you're right about the Japanese magazines. They never, and it could be different now, and I don't know that, but back in the 80s, they never took their audience, their crowd for granted, and they never insulted the intelligence by their articles in the magazines. And certainly the photography was stellar. Conversely speaking, the U.S. had what we call the Bill Apter magazines, which were, magazines where the storylines were predominantly, if not all, fictitious, and they were all made up. And some of them were so outrageous and so blatantly stupid that you just have to read it and you just have to shake your head and go, really? Really? And I get the logic. Wrestling was a kayfabed, worked sport, so why not just create storylines that are just complete bullshit to sell? But so flipping the coin, could a more serious approach in the 80s, much like Japan was doing, could that have worked in the US? And because we didn't really have it, could this have been where the Observer became so successful?
Oh, of course. I don't think there's any question about that. Because I think that people, the rise of things like Facebook and Twitter are because people crave greater content, And I know that, just to break kayfabe for you folks out there, one of the future episodes that we're going to do, an idea that Barry had, was we're going to look at the rise of the newsletters in the late 70s and 80s. And we're going to have some people on talking about that. But I think absolutely, because I know when I first became exposed to the newsletters, I did not say, oh, this has all been bullshit. Why have I been fun? No, I wanted more. And I reached out and got more newsletters. I got more people's opinions on, and some are more not as thoughtfully and eloquently stated as Dave did with the Observer, but there were other good newsletters out there. And, and Barry, your Chair Shots magazine was a good one, primarily because I wrote for it, but that's another story altogether.
You were the lead writer. That was in your contract, Jeff.
So I was like the Bruce Mitchell to your Wade Keller. Which, by the way, that's the first time in 169 episodes I've mentioned the name Wade Keller. But anyway,
if ever been compared to him, I'll go with that. That's fine. But
you're a young teenage boy from Minnesota back in those days.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but
10-year-old boy from Minnesota, sure.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but when you found a good newsletter that provided, maybe a different point of view or an alternative point of view from Dave, or one that maybe agreed with them but took a different slant to it, you appreciated it. And the ones that were like, oh God, this is fucking bullshit, this guy doesn't want to stop, you stopped reading it, And there were a lot of newsletters that if Dave was there I go, Barry, the penultimate. That's gonna piss off somebody in the group. There were other secondary newsletters that were just, for what they were absolutely fine, and they were worth your time and subscription money that you might pay, or whatever you negotiated. Because there was some negotiation on getting newsletters back then. But I think that your point you make is valid, because I think the rise of the smart fan in this country and the rise of the Observer and things like that are, in part, not in total, but in part, played a role in the lessening of the newsstand magazine, along with stuff like the WWF was not letting Apter shoot ringside, so they weren't having the access to the guys in the WWF, and that was Vince Jr.'s own idea. I really failed to see the logic in that, other than that he wanted control over everything. God forbid, Barry, I'm calling Vince McMahon a control freak. Who would have figured? So, but I think there's definitely that the Observer definitely played a part in the smartening up of the wrestling audience. And for some, it led to an increased interest in the product. I mean, why else would people travel from all over the country to watch wrestling pay-per-views? You know, whether they were in North Carolina, New Orleans, Houston, Chicago, wherever, you know, people would fly from all over the country to see a pay-per-view based on the fact that Dave Meltzer said this is going to be a kick-ass pay-per-view. So people would go.
Yeah, you're right too, Jeff. So again, hindsight for us, you know, hindsight is 2020, and you can see things clearly. But stop now and think about all of the pay-per-view get-togethers that took place in the 80s going into the 90s, and probably by 94 it was over for the most part. But think about the missed opportunities that WCW, NWA could have had if they would have actually organized these. If they would have actually organized and encouraged people to do this, and they didn't. They stayed like that's like, you know, you're talking a multi-million-dollar or billion-dollar company. Not one person could come up with that fucking idea. Yeah. Like, we could profit off of this. We can make some money off of this.
Well, not only that, they could have profited. Think about this, just like for a wrestling pay-per-view. And, you know, like say we go into it, because they were primarily, you know, NWA pay-per-views that we were going to. I think that's pretty fair to say. Yep. But I mean, you don't even have to say, hey, we're going to give you a Q&A session with Ric Flair. You could have done, we're going to give you a Q&A session with Arn Anderson or somebody. You know, do you know how much extra people would have paid to sit there and say, you know, I mean, if it's just like, okay, we're going to give you the ticket plus for an additional $20. You can come to a Q&A with Arn Anderson. Right. And Arn Anderson wouldn't even have to break fucking character at that point. You know, he certainly didn't in his book, you know, or you could have had, you know, somebody like Ricky Morton or, good Lord, Jim Cornette. Can you imagine him in a Q&A session? You know, 100 people paying, you know, $20 or something like that. And hey, Jimmy, how'd you like to make an extra couple $1,000 doing this Q&A session where you shoot the shit with some smart fans for, you know, for an hour or two? I mean, you know, it's just money lost. That's the way I look at it.
Yeah, but it's just weird when, again, it's, look, you and I are two guys, you know, I'm sitting on my couch, you're in your computer chair, Lou's in his computer chair. We're just two guys just, you know, thinking about this. But you had multimillionaires sitting in these rooms, these office rooms, drawing up new ideas and things and how you can make the company money. And it's like, nobody can come up with this. Like,
they're smarter than us, Bear. They were smarter than us.
Exactly. Right. Exactly. They must have known something we didn't know. But a package, you know, your air travel's included. You get a hotel room, you get a ticket, and then you get breakfast. There's going to be 30 people having breakfast with Arn Anderson or whatever it is, Buddy Landel. These guys and these wrestlers would have eaten it up.
I don't know if Buddy Landel would have been able to get up for breakfast. I got to be honest with you. Buddy loved the cocktails.
Yeah.
Cocktails with Buddy Landel.
There you go.
I would have paid fucking $20 for that. I can tell you that. Well, now we're going to sit there and think about
him for free. So let's see it. Exactly.
So just to round out this particular report, the match is fucking awesome. I will put a link up to it. The thing is, Barry, there's another match between these same six guys that took place, I want to say, like maybe 6 or 7 months before that. That is also apparently a very well-received match. So, yeah, you know what, Barry? We need to do more All Japan matches from like the early 90s when they were doing the shit that was just unbelievable, the Kings Road style, where they just beat the living fuck out of one another. And unfortunately, I say that, and now, good Lord, if you see a picture of Kawada now, he just, wow, he's in rough shape. I mean, just because he got the stew beat out of him, you know. But yeah, when I first suggested this match, I texted Barry and I said, "You're going to be happy with the match that I picked out." I said, "I got good news and bad news." He said, "What's that?" I said, "Well, the good news is it's a Jumbo Tsuruta match." And he's like, "Yay!" I go, "Bad news is we're looking at 50 fucking minutes here." And he was like, "Oh no!" But, you know, and like he said, this is not a 50 minutes that drags on. This is a 50-minute match where you're like at 45 minutes, you're going, "Fuck, man, I really don't want this match to go home now because it's so fucking good." And it's really an entertaining match. All six guys just absolutely busting their ass. Like I said, 4 Hall of Famers, one maybe just under the threshold, and one guy that was forever underrated, and that's Masa Fuchi. A guy, you know, safe to say, Barry, Masa Fuchi is a guy that if you were having a match with him and you went to do a spot, you knew he was going to be there waiting for you to, you know, whether it's a flying move or something, he was going to be in the right position and ready to take your move. And that's the ultimate sign of a professional. And yeah, I just can't speak highly enough about this match, Bear.
Yeah, it's that good too. And I think there were 3 matches between these two teams, if I'm correct. Everything that I read, this is the best of the 3, but I don't think that any of the 3 are bad. I mean, you're not going to wind up in a situation like that. So with this match, Jeff, and so let me ask you a question. I think you and I have talked about this too, and I think you told me Choshu. By the way, Christmas, you saw that I got a fish for my daughter.
Oh, yes.
It is a beta fish. Now, the beta fish, apparently the origins come from Thailand, but I circumvent that. I named my fish Choshu.
Oh, very cool. Now, does the fish do the lariato?
He does the lariato, and strangely enough, he has these little white boots on.
Okay, there you go.
So, yeah. So, but I think the question I think I asked you years ago, we're actually coming up on 3.5 years at this stage, but I said, if you could have dinner with any Japanese star, living or dead, who would it be? And I believe you told me it was Choshu. And I think I said living for me would probably be Choshu as well. Certainly Jumbo Tsuruta would be at the top of my list. Part of
Choshu, excuse me for interrupting, was the fact that not only was he a great wrestler, but a guy that jumped from promotion back to his original promotion and was fantastic in both promotions, was given a lead role. And then when he came back to New Japan, had an incredible run as the booker for New Japan for a while, like almost Gato-esque, which is very high praise. Yep. He was a fantastic booker. Please continue, Barry.
And that's actually a really good comparison too, because it really was Gato-esque, because he in his run as booker was legendary, but extremely long too. And Choshu's not a guy. I don't think you can watch one Choshu match and go, holy shit, he's the greatest wrestler I've ever seen. I think you've got to see a handful of Choshu matches to truly appreciate who he is. And maybe that can be said with Tsuruta, as well. But Choshu, so I think the question I was going to, who is your favorite Japanese wrestler of all time?
And before I tell you that, I will tell you that you're right about Choshu. But that being said, he had a very famous match, I want to say October-ish of 1985 with Ric Flair. And I remember at the time, Dave Meltzer saying he had never been so looking forward to seeing a match, because here were 2 of his favorite wrestlers of all time. And the match, just for whatever reason, was a complete stinkeroo. And the guys did not match up with one another. The psychology wasn't there. And it was really, if you ever see that match out there, I'm sure it's on YouTube.
Well, and I'm sorry for interrupting this time, but do you know what match that reminds me of? And 2 guys that worked with each other in Florida, but the Jack Briscoe spoiler match that we reviewed a year and a half ago, just to me was like a flat match. They just didn't work well together, at least on this special night. And it was bizarre because I think those 2 guys probably could have worked with anybody, right? They were so good.
And every once in a while you have that, and then every once in a while you have the opposite, where you have 2 guys, you're like, these guys are never going to have a go. And lo and behold, they'll have an absolute epic match, and you'll go, who fucking figured? To answer your question, I would say my favorite Japanese wrestler of all time. Well, during the heyday, I was really and this is the funny thing, the 2 guys that I loved, I was more in the 80s a New Japan guy than I was an All Japan guy. Obviously, in the 90s, I became more of an All Japan guy with the Kings Road style. So I would say during the 80s, my 2 guys were Choshu and Akira Maeda, who, by the way, Barry, I don't know if you had a chance to notice, I just posted a picture of today on our Facebook group, Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren, a very quick plug I got in there, Bear. So I was a fan of those 2 guys. And when I traveled to Japan in December of 1987, I'm looking forward to seeing both these guys, because I know we're going to a bunch of New Japan shows. And I get there and Meltzer says, oh, you heard about what happened? Maeda kicked Choshu in the face and broke his orbital bone. And then they suspended Maeda. And I'm like, the 2 fucking guys I came here to see are now out and I don't get to see them? What the fuck? So I would say, let me see. I guess I'm going to have to go Choshu, or maybe, like one of the smaller guys. I was a big fan of Liger, of course, and I liked some of the lighter weight guys. Takada, when he was with New Japan, I was a big fan of his. The junior heavyweights in New Japan in the late 80s were just unfucking believable. You had guys like Nobuhiko Takada, you had Shiro Koshinaka, you had Kichi Yamada had not yet become Jushin Liger, but he was a guy that was everybody that was a huge fan, fans like we described earlier, they all knew about Kichi Yamada before the Americans did because they didn't put Kichi Yamada on the TV shows. And that's why when Yoshiaki Yatsu finally made his debut, it got a huge pop from the crowd because all the fans in the building knew how good Yatsu was, but he hadn't been on television yet. So I was like,
Yatsu
I said,
was great.
Before
Yatsu
he started putting on weight, he was fantastic and so agile, such a great fucking worker. And who would have thought that, this guy that was in Florida and Mid-Atlantic and world class when they called him Tola Yatsu for some reason was such a great, great worker and such a great epic athlete. And of course, because the whole rule of thumb was you send them over, you basically use them. And they did the same thing with Tenryu. I think Tsuruta was one of the rare cases of a guy that was sent over and they put him because in Amarillo, they really made him a big deal. And
which is the Funks, obviously.
Yeah, sure. So I'll throw that question back. Tsuruta still your number one guy?
Tsuruta is my number one guy of all time. I think if I was going to look at somebody to have dinner with, Choshu would be the guy, and a lot of it would be I would want to hear about his time in Florida in 1975. He spent 8 months here, and there's
he was billed as.
He was billed as underneath his legitimate name, I believe, which is Mitsu Yoshida.
Yeah.
He just, I think the stories there, not only Japan, but his time here training with Hiro Matsuda, with Karl Gotch would be great. To add to what you were saying, the talent pool in all Japan when it came to the junior heavyweights in the late 80s and 90s, not just the Japanese guys, but your Chris Benoit, your Eddie Guerrero.
New Japan. You said all Japan.
No, that's right. You knew Japan. Chris Benoit. Well, in both companies, in a sense. Owen Hart, but look at all the British guys too. Rollerball Rocco and all these guys that came over. This was, that's probably the best of all time from the junior heavyweight standpoint.
One of the things dinner with Choshu that could be included that you could ask him about is Choshu was the first guy I really think, although they had some of it, it never really exploded into the main program in the company was when Choshu and his group decided to take on Inoki's group, and it was considered, Ishigun versus Sekigun. Well, Ishigun was Choshu's army versus Sekigun, which was Inoki and Seiji Sakaguchi. That was the first time that Japanese guys had ever faced each other in the main event. It was always the Japanese guys versus the American guys. It was an old formula. It worked, and it continued to work. And then, there was the stuff with Inoki occasionally facing off with, guys like when Rusher Kimura left the IWA or the IWA folded and they were taken in. There were some of that, and it was strong Kobayashi, but the majority of the Japan versus Japan stuff was not part of a main event or the main focus of the whole promotion. And when Choshu turned on the Japanese guys, the guys in Choshu's army, guys like Animal Hamaguchi and Killer Khan and Yatsu and people like that. And it was something that had never been done before. It was truly groundbreaking to the Japanese to see two Japanese guys going off, facing off with one another, because it was just something like, Baba, for example, for years had the, because of the Funks and, people like that, the main event program was always Baba versus the American guy. And then it became Tsuruta versus the American guy. And it wasn't until the late part of the 80s that Tsuruta versus Tenryu became such a focal part of the company. And that's because Choshu had jumped back to New Japan. Okay, that's your late 80s education into Japanese wrestling booking. Whew, okay, Bear. Let's start to do the go home, and we have some unfortunate things to talk about before we do the final go home. And that's the fact that, unfortunately, to coin a phrase, the final go home, we had two guys that were a big part of the wrestling business, Danny Hodge and John Huber, Mr. Brody Lee, pass. Let's talk about the legend of Danny Hodge. And, Barry, instead of you and I talking about Danny Hodge, let's go to a clip, because I remember when we were talking to Jerry Briscoe a few episodes ago, we asked Jerry Briscoe just how big a deal the late Danny Hodge was to the people of Oklahoma. Lou, why don't we play that tape now?
Well, in the home state of Oklahoma, Danny Hodge, there's probably three athletes that, they're different generational athletes, but these three were my generation. And in this order to me, because I was a wrestler, it was Danny Hodge, Mickey Mantle, and Jim Thorpe. And those were three idols in Oklahoma. That every kid you grew up idolizing Jim Thorpe, because 90% Oklahoma at that time was Native American, and Jim Thorpe being the great Olympian and the great athlete that he was. Of course, him, then Mickey Mantle, the Yankees and Mickey Mantle, and Commerce, Oklahoma was about 80 miles from my hometown, and Hodge, who was an Olympian and an undefeated national champion. So we
Golden Gloves boxer too.
Yeah, and I go to first only to win a national championship the same year in boxing and wrestling. So we had some pretty good role models to look up to, and plus, like I said, small town where wrestling was king in the surrounding areas. We had probably a half dozen or so Olympic champions just living in that little small area of rural Oklahoma.
So one of the things that people always say about Danny Hodge, obviously that great tendon strength, can crush an apple with his hands, can rip phone books and do all these things. You knew Danny Hodge. You've worked with Danny Hodge many times. How would Danny Hodge have fared in MMA fighting?
God, I get asked that question so much, and my answer is always the same. At preparation, there's so many styles that go into MMA, and those guys are so skilled. But becoming good friends with a lot of the guys, the Dana Cormiers and there's so many of them from Oklahoma State, that are champions. So I've got to know a few of them and their mindset. And their mindset in combat sports is probably the most important thing you have. You just got to have that mindset that you don't care about humanity. You're going to go through it, And Hodge had as sweet a guy, and anybody that's ever been around Hodge, he's the sweetest guy, nicest guy you'll ever want to meet. But he also has that mentality where he could flip that switch and be a madman like these guys are now. I think Hodge is the prototype. You go back and you look at perfect athletes and how they should be built for combat sports, and the mentality part of it. Danny Hodge fits in both of those categories right up at the top of the ladder.
I've always thought that when you talk about the possibility of someone like Danny Hodge in any kind of combat sports or MMA, you combine his amateur background, which is fantastic, the fact that he was, Golden Gloves boxer, and then when you throw in that third equation, which is that tendon strength, folks, he could break a pair of pliers, okay? And he
many times.
Yeah, and just incredible tendon. If Hodge got his hands on you, it was over. That's as simple as that. I don't mean to get off on a tangent here on Danny Hodge, although I could talk for
guys by wrist, 300-pounders, football players, from OU back, used to want to come and meet the great Danny Hodge and see if he was really as strong as they want to. Of course, when Watts was there, Watts used to bring all those guys in just to laugh at them. I mean, they'd be All-American, three-time All-American football players, 6'5", 300-pound Watts friends, Watts-size friends. Watts would bring them by and just kind of rib that. Hey, Danny, this guy thinks he can take you. And Danny just get that little giggle on him, that little grin, that little sparkle in his eye, grab your hand, and with the other hand, he'd just grab your wrist or your elbow, and he'd start squeezing. And you could see the fear and the pain in these big old boys' eyes as they start wilting down to their knees. When Danny get them that, was this convincing enough? And he please let go, Mr.
Barry, I don't know if we can truly convey to the people listening to this show just what a huge, and Jerry Briscoe did a very eloquent job, but wow, what a huge deal Danny Hodge was back in the day.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's going to be lost. I think a lot of people know who he is because he is spoken in these revered, hushed tones. So the younger fans who never saw him understand who he is and what his legacy is. But Danny's career was over 44 years ago. I mean, it ended in 1976, and his heyday would have been the 1960s. I believe he started in the late 50s, I think it was late 50s, and by 76 it was over. But Danny Hodge was a big deal. As you posted yesterday, he made the cover of Sports Illustrated. He was on a bunch of different, he was a boxer, he was a professional wrestler. And anybody that ever encountered Danny Hodge, the stories of his strength, his feats of strength are legendary, but they'll all tell you the same thing also, that he was just a great, great guy, but not a guy you ever want to mess around or fuck around with. Because if you do, Danny will set you straight and he'll smile at you as he's setting you straight. And there's a bunch of these stories that are out there. There is a story about Danny Hodge in the book written by Pat Barrett. Do you remember Irish Pat?
Oh, yeah, sure.
So Irish Pat
Former
Barrett.
WWF tag champ, Irish Pat Barrett, I believe.
That's correct. He was with, Danucci? I believe it was Danucci, but I could be absolutely wrong with that. So anyways, he was one of the first guys to write a book, Irish Pat Barrett, and it's probably 30, 35 years ago. This was way before the proliferation of books that have come our way where everybody writes a book, except for you, Jeff, yours are, but everybody else writes a book. And there's, every wrestler has written a book. But back in those days when a wrestler wrote a book, it was a big deal because there was maybe only 2 or 3. So he wrote a book and I read it, and it's a story about Danny Hodge and Pat Barrett. Pat Barrett also world junior champion at one point, and they're in Mexico. And I believe it's Hodge that has a gash. They're talking about this gash that Hodge has. And I think the story, I haven't read the book in 30 years, but the story was really talking about how tough Danny Hodge was. And a lot of these guys that come from Oklahoma were tough. Steve Dr. Death Williams, Danny Hodge, obviously. And Hodge has got this open gash on his body. And Pat Barrett refers to it as a woman's private parts, but he uses the "see you next Tuesday" vernacular.
Ah,
exactly. But apparently it's just like this big gash that's split open. Well, Danny Hodge, I guess, just covers it, packs it, goes out, works, wins his match, whatever it is. And I think the story really was built around just how tough. But if you can get Barrett's book, it's interesting. It breaks kayfabe. Sometimes it maintains kayfabe, but other times. Danny Hodge, we call a lot of people legend, Jeff. Danny Hodge, yeah, I don't think anybody could ever dispute that.
And just for clarification again, for those uninitiated to the legend that was Danny Hodge, you're talking about an Olympic caliber wrestler, okay? A guy that I want to say when he was in college, undefeated, wasn't he, Barry?
AAU, right? He was yeah.
And just an amazing amateur wrestler, a guy that not only was he never beaten, I think there was a period of time where he wasn't even taken off his feet for years and years in a match. And besides that, he was also a Golden Gloves fucking boxer. Okay. So you think about those two, plus he had the situation where he had double tendons in his hands and wrist. And the legend throughout wrestling was if Danny Hodge ever got a hold of you, it was over. He's a guy that could not only just crush an apple with his hand without even thinking about it, he could break a pair of pliers. That's the kind of grip strength this guy had. If he got a hold of you, I don't fucking care who you were. It was done. And you think about the fact that if Danny Hodge was around today, how much money Danny Hodge could make working for the UFC, because this was a guy that, and Barry said he was a guy that could do it and he'd smile at you. He was basically by all accounts, a good guy. Think about it. This guy was a fucking asshole. Think about if this guy didn't give a shit. Oh my God. He would have been terrifying. So anyway.
He was a very moral guy at the end of the day. And I should say too, we were in contact with his daughter-in-law over the last 48 hours, but the family is at the request of Danny's wife. There'll be no interviews given to anyone, and they were apologizing for it. And I was please, you don't need exactly no reason to apologize. Fully understandable. You're right for privacy during this time, but we just wanted to make sure that we were covering bases. I will tell you, I got to meet Danny Hodge once. It was 1979. At the Wrestling Fans International Association convention in Memphis, and Danny was there, and he had been retired 3 years, but still looked, he was still in great shape, still Danny Hodge, and he was such a gentle, again, you hear all the stories, and you hear the stories of guys that worked with him where Danny would stretch them, but he would smile at them. And if anybody ever got out of line, Danny like never lost his temper. He would just maintain this cool composure as he fucking just rearranged your entire body parts. But here was the other thing. Danny at that convention was selling his cookbook, and he had and I'm not making it up, he had the Danny Hodge cookbook, and I bought a copy, which I still have to this day, in the envelope that Danny sent, and Danny actually addressed it. Danny, you've seen his signature, right?
Yes.
Really unique signature. It's not one that you're going to be able to forge. I'm sure somebody could forge it, but it's a very unique signature. It's a fantastic signature. And he addressed the envelope and wound up mailing it to me. I ordered it at the fan convention, and he autographed it as well. I've never used it to cook. I've never followed the recipes, but I'll dig this out of storage and post it. But I just thought that was interesting. Here's a guy that could literally take, the biggest, strongest wrestler and tie him up into knots. At the same time, he'd put on an apron and whip you up a mean batch of French toast,
So, and when you were telling that story, think about the stories that on this very podcast that Bob Roop told about when the guys would come in and decide down at 106 North Albany in Tampa, hey, I want to be a pro wrestler. And Eddie would go in, would send the guys in the ring with, your Bob Roops and people like that could put a hurting on you. And Eddie would encourage the guys to hurt the fans coming in that wanted to be wrestlers. Think about the fact if Danny Hodge had an Eddie Graham mindset, and I don't mean this to speak ill of Eddie, but just that ruthlessness that maybe only a promoter really knows. If Danny Hodge had that sort of ruthlessness, that's a scary, scary possibility, Barry.
It is too. And look, Eddie Graham had a mean streak. It's well documented that there was a certain sadistic streak to him, but Danny Hodge didn't. And I think Skandor Akbar told a story, and I've seen it repeated over and over, how Skandor maybe was a little cocky in the ring. And this is going back to the early years, because I believe they became great friends after that, and certainly both had long careers. But Skandor, I think, was, getting a little free in the ring, and Danny just quickly tied him up and, brought him back down to earth. So, yeah, I agree with you. Rest in peace, Danny Hodge, 88 years old. Would have loved to have had him at a fan fest. Just imagine, the stories you could have been told, and it's fucking Danny Hodge just to be in the same room with the guy,
Yeah, and I'll just finish this segment off with, I had the chance to meet Danny Hodge when I went out to Vegas for a CAC. Over like a decade ago. And he was one of those guys. And think about it. We had all kind of the wrestlers that at this point were still alive that would go to CAC at this point. But Danny Hodge was one of those guys that when Danny Hodge was holding court, it was like a different vibe. And I mean, and that being said, we had guys like Mad Dog Bashan that were there, that were internationally known. And like, you're sitting there and like, oh, holy shit, here comes Danny Hodge, and it was just a different vibe because he was real. There's nothing more that needs to be said. Danny Hodge, he wasn't a pro wrestler. He was real. And so we raise an adult beverage to the memory of the late, great Danny Hodge, and got his money's worth out of life, as opposed to someone who did not get the full maximum, because at age 41 years old, Barry, we lost John Huber, Mr. Brody Lee, and I believe he was Luke Harper in the WWE. I'm going to throw it to you because, of course, I am not a big fan of the product that the WWE has been putting out for the last decade or so. So why don't you tell us a little bit of your thoughts and remembrances of John Huber?
Yeah, so he was a darling on the indie circuit for years. And, he was one of those guys that whenever somebody saw him, it was like, why aren't you, in the WWE, or why aren't you in TNA, or, one of the bigger outfits, because you were in these smaller promotions. And I believe he worked a couple of smaller promotions in Florida. But, here was a guy that had a good look. Here was a guy that could really go in the ring and make it look legitimate and real. And there was nothing about him that didn't scream the big time. This was a guy that, had everything going for him. And his run in the WWE was always really interesting, because as what happens is, if the writers don't know what to do for you, if they don't know how to write storylines or do things for you, you basically sit at home. So I know that he went through an injury at one point in the WWE. He was part of the Bray Wyatt family, which was, something that I think was very successful with Eric Rowan. And then he and Eric Rowan broke away from Bray Wyatt. They formed a tag team. I forget what that tag team, the Bludgeon Brothers, I believe it was. And they were pretty, that was a pretty interesting team because you had two big guys that looked like they could just completely destroy you. But for one reason or another, I believe he was unhappy there. And I think Eric Rowan was part of it. Eric Rowan, not a knock on him, but he wasn't at the same level at that stage of a wrestler or a worker that John Huber was. So by default, I think John Huber got a lot of time off. I think he was very unhappy. I think he had asked for his release numerous times. Finally, was granted, joined AEW. It was really nice to see, though, over the last few days, Triple H, Stephanie McMahon. I don't know if Vince said anything and probably didn't, but a lot of the executives were actually praising him and saying what a great guy he was. But people who normally don't heap a lot of praise, Randy Orton is one. Randy Orton, who tends to be extremely critical of people, Randy Orton was praising John Huber and saying what a great guy. Everybody did. And that's what I think the common denominator was. People that normally they never comment.
And again, Barry, one of the other universal comments was what a great father he was.
Oh, what a great person, what a great father, what a great husband he was, what a great son he was, because someone, I believe it might have been his mom, somebody posted a photo of he with his mom. That was a fairly recent photo. So I think a good guy. And I think there was this appreciation for the fact that he had really paid his dues. You hear about paying your dues, right? And, I have mixed feelings about that. But at the same time, this was a guy that I think had really hardcore paid his dues over the last 15, 20 years. And he got a big break in AEW, won the TNT title, which was a squash match over Cody, lost it back in the rematch. And I believe that was the last match he had. And then he disappeared off of TV. I think they only mentioned him maybe once, and that was in passing. The Dark Order still on television every week, but really no mention of Brody Lee. And then, to see, was it Saturday night, I believe, during Svengoolie, all the news was breaking. And, Brody Lee at 41 years old, John Huber dead. And it's just tragic. And I believe they're saying right now, Jeff, that it was the family's released a statement saying non-COVID related lung issue. So whatever it is, and, at the end of the day, I don't think it from our standpoint, it should matter because, again, a great father, wrestling is one thing, but, at the end of the day, I remember when I was unfortunate enough to be managing restaurants and I was working sometimes 16-hour days, somebody pulled me aside and they said, on your tombstone, it's never going to say you were a fantastic restaurant manager. It's never going to say that. It's going to say loving father or husband or something. And they're 100% right. And I think it was within a couple months I was out of the restaurant business after hearing that. But I have to agree. At the end of the day, a child has lost their father. And apparently, again, he was a great dad and just a great guy overall. So rest in peace. This sucks. Jeff, let's be honest. This fucking sucks. And everybody will say 2020, it isn't like, January 1st is going to come along and everything's going to be fine. So I have a feeling, a few months into next year, we'll be saying 2021 sucks. But I do feel positive that as the next year winds down, we won't be saying that. But we've lost a lot of great people. We've lost family and friends to COVID. We've had people that are fighting COVID. We lost a lot of our heroes. And on a daily basis, it's just, somebody else is gone and it just sucks. So rest in peace, John Huber.
All right, Barry, as we begin to do the go home, let's just say that we are a couple days away from a brand new year, 2021. Some of us, as Barry mentioned, will not be unhappy to see 2020 in our rear view mirror. That is for sure. So, Barry, I'm going to go throw it to you first. What are you looking forward to most in 2021?
To get back to where I can have some sort of normal life. In Pennsylvania right now, every dine-in restaurant is closed. You can only do takeout through the entire state. The city of Philadelphia has been closed prior to that announcement going out, and it's till January the 14th. But, you know, it was funny. I was on an Oingo Boingo fan page on Facebook the other day, and they said,
because of course, why not? But go ahead.
Well, what else do I have to do with this fucking stage? Let's be real honest. Porn can only go so long, internet porn, but you know, it said, what was the last concert you attended? And I said, coincidentally, it was the former members of Oingo Boingo when I was out in Los Angeles. So I haven't seen a live show music since November the 1st of 2019. And I used to go to concerts all the time. So did you. I haven't seen a wrestling show even before that. I don't know. I haven't eaten indoors in a restaurant probably since February of this year. I have not been in a movie theater since October of 2019. I just want to be able to fucking do something like I used to do without having to, like, you know, fear for my life or something, or catching COVID. So I think it would be nice if the hate could stop. You know, there's been this proliferation of hate over the last year. Certainly a lot of us are going stir crazy being in the house, but I just want to get back to living my life the way I kind of used to live it at some point.
Lou, what about you? What are you looking forward to most in 2021, man? Let's hear those dulcet tones.
Ew. I'm looking forward to not having to keep a 6-foot distance constantly at the front of my mind, that we can, you know, go about peaceably and not worry so much about getting this nasty virus. I'm looking forward to crossing my fingers that I can get a vaccine shot and be able to go to the delayed CAC reunion in April in Las Vegas. Like Barry, I am looking forward to dining out in an indoor venue. I think that's something that was a little underrated, thinking about it in retrospect. Yeah. And also just getting back and, boy, just having a community, a literal community instead of a virtual community. And I think that involves even, you know, God willing and the creek don't rise, having live wrestling shows and supporting people and just hanging out with, you know, the freaks of my ilk once more.
Lou the Freak Kipilman. It's your new nickname, Lou. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Yes.
Well, I'll tell you, 2020 for myself, I have battled, as been well documented, a lot of health issues. So it's made me certainly appreciative of what I have. And I have to tell you that, you know, when the chips are down, I really found out just how strong of a supporter I have in my corner right here in lovely Cumming, Georgia, in Mrs. Bowdren, who really went above and beyond the call, and I can't thank her enough for everything she's done for me. But as far as what I'm looking forward to, you know, the restaurant issue here in northern Georgia is, you know, because we're not in Atlanta, not as big a deal. We are still able, and we are extremely lucky to go out using, you know, your various precautions to go out and have a bite to eat occasionally. And so that's not as big an issue. But what Mrs. Bowdren and I, we were talking about it yesterday, are looking forward to going out to the movies, because that still is an issue around here. Going out, getting your large popcorn with an unhealthy amount of butter on it, perhaps getting a Slurpee with it, you know, and sitting there and watching a movie. And unfortunately, a little tidbit that I've heard, the new Wonder Woman movie apparently is a big heap and steam of shit. That's the reviews that have come out initially. So the first movie we go to see will not be apparently Wonder Woman. And the amazing thing is Barry, did you see the first Wonder Woman that came out like about 3 or 4 years ago?
I did, yes. I liked it.
And it was actually a really good movie. And as good as that was, this one is, based on everything I've read, is really, really a letdown for a lot of people. So I did have, I think somebody posted that they saw it and it wasn't too bad, but the majority of the opinions is that it's a very, very big disappointment, which is too bad. That's another story for another time. So I will throw out a little bone for the brothership to chew on. We're going to give you a little quick headline for next episode, Barry. Match of the week. We are going to Memphis. And that's enough tease for next week. We are going to have a match that, let's just say, Barry Rose will be extremely happy when he watches this match. So until next week, for our producer, Lou Kipilman, the freak, Lou Kipilman, and our own Barry Rose, I am the booker, Jeff Bowdren, and Breaking Kayfabe with Bowdren and Barry. Lou thought I was going to forget. It's a production of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network. And until next week, we will see you later, folks.